Chapter VIII, An Incredible Task. The trips to Chilka were now our set program every weekend. Although the sighting of spaceships was something normal, the extraterrestrials suddenly began to miss the encounters. Such a situation confused and worried us a lot, and we consequently had a strange, uncomfortable sensation of failure and abandonment. We immediately discussed the probable cause for the absence of any physical phenomenon. We thought that we had lost favor with the guides, that we had somehow offended them, or that they might have lost their patience with us. Anyway, we had been deprived of them too quickly. Upset over the lack of evidence and continuity of contact, we began a careful, detailed analysis of all the proceedings that had led us up to the experience of concrete manifestation, and also examined the list of all participants. It did not take us long to find the answer. The contact group had been formed inside the Peruvian Institute of Interplanetary Relations. Consequently, there was a permanent flux of people in and out of the contact activities without a serious, definite involvement on their part, their only motivation being curiosity. The ones who were always present at the field outings were in fact very few. So the presence of new, uncommitted people was hindering the performance of the ones who worked seriously, as well as the development of what the extraterrestrials wanted to accomplish here. The contact experience was a kind of extra benefit offered by the Institute, a fascinating entertainment, a rather different attraction for its participants, a unique opportunity. Unfortunately, our extraterrestrial guides had become only a very interesting exhibition. Never before had so many people attended the activities in the Institute. Old members who had not come to the Institute for years showed up again and wanted to learn more about the great novelty, and obviously wanted to join us for the encounters. We called a meeting of everybody who had been involved in the contact right from the beginning, and after hours of deliberation, we decided on a definite disengagement from the activities of the Institute so that we could resume our contacts separately from its members. In this way, we would prevent any hindrance to the continuity of our activities. Carlos, my father, reacted furiously to such a radical decision and said that with or without us, he would continue his outings to the dunes of Chilka with the members of the Institute that were willing to accompany him. I was greatly annoyed with the situation. My father was angry with us, and I wanted him to understand how delicate the problem was. It was impossible to work properly with new people acting solely out of curiosity and with very little determination. Somehow he understood our arguments, but he could not ignore the members of the Institute who kept pressing him. How could he abandon what had taken him a whole lifetime of sacrifices to build? Just now, when things were happening with so much liveliness? As a researcher, he had seen his dearest dream come true, and as an individual, he had a universe full of questions to ask. Unfortunately for all of us, we had reached an impasse. A long separation began that threatened to possibly never end. There was a certain uneasiness in the HQ of the family. The meetings of our group of contactees were held in the dining room of our home to avoid any confrontation with members of the Institute. When we had taken all these measures, the field contact returned to normal. Now, with the group consisting only of people who wanted to work seriously, the physical presence of the spaceships resumed. The region of Chilka, 60 kilometers south of Lima, was a favorable place for contact, not only because it was removed from civilization amongst mountains and desert dunes, but also because, according to the extraterrestrials, south of Chilka and 100 kilometers offshore, there was a submarine extraterrestrial base, part of a complex system of bases along the Peruvian coast, consisting of two main centers and a small group of research installations distributed as follows. One between the beaches of León Dormido and Puerto Viejo, near kilometers 80 and 82 on the South Pan American Highway. Two others between Piura and Lambayeque to the north. The spaceships we had contact with and the ones we usually sighted came from that place. At that time, we made friends with an engineer called Carlos Belavan, who took part in the activities at the Institute and was a friend of my father's. Due to the requirements of his job, the engineer had moved house several times in the last months. Consequently, he had many personal items and pieces of furniture in different relations and friends' houses while his own new home was being built. As he was always hurrying around, he had lost control of the situation and did not know exactly where his things were. One day, he needed some documents very badly and felt terribly worried, for he would not be able to honor his commitments and pay the employees' salaries. He was in total despair. That same day, he went to my house to see my father for some professional advice. My father was not home, and Sixto invited him to come in and wait. During a conversation, he told Sixto, Rose, and Moki about his problem. Sixto said, "Let me ask Oxalk. He may help." A little skeptical, Belavan agreed. Any help was welcome. Sixto concentrated and contacted his guide. Oxalk promptly answered that the documents were inside a washing machine. The engineer replied that the information was wrong, for he did not have that kind of household appliance, and had already looked everywhere. Even so, Sixto insisted that they should search thoroughly again. Visibly skeptical, Belavan took Sixto, Rose, and Moki to a relative's house where most of his things were kept, and there were the documents right inside an old washing machine now out of use. Deeply impressed by that evidence, Belavan told us about something that would confirm the authenticity of our contact and the nearness of one of the submarine bases. Belavan worked for the Norpesca Company S.A. Its fishing boats sailed along the Peruvian coast looking for big, commercially important schools of fish. That was a daily and nightly routine, depending on the kind of fish sought and the waters they inhabited. Towards the end of 1969, one of these fishing boats, or bolicheras as they are called in Peru, Roncal, sailed in the waters of Lambayeque in the northern part of the country early one morning using a radar system called echogram to locate schools of fish and trace in relief the bottom of the sea. Suddenly, the officer on duty noticed that the graphics on the echogram showed some curious, regular shapes that he had never seen before. He called in other members of the crew who also confirmed the unusual register. Simultaneously, the sailor on duty called the attention of the crew to a strange, astonishing circular light that was shining from the bottom of the sea. Immediately, everybody leaned over the railings to watch something quite similar to a Spielberg film. A very large, disc-shaped object surrounded by multicolored lights came slowly up from the bottom of the ocean beside the boat, creating a scene that nobody would ever forget. The spaceship of unknown origin climbed slowly, and turned round over the boat, accelerated quickly, and disappeared in the vastness of space. After the story, Belavan showed us the original echograms of the event taken by the crew of the Roncal. In the echograms, you could clearly see not only the outline of two discs coming up from the bottom, but also the outline of a gigantic spaceship laying undisturbed at the bottom of the sea. These facts substantiated for our group that the information they were getting through communication was true, and also that sooner or later it would be proven. All through the month of June, our reformulated group, independent of the Institute, resumed their activities. During that period, the guides began to indicate their desire for better preparation to make the reason for their presence known. Little by little, in successive communications, they mentioned the fact that they were planning to prepare a group of individuals in order to start a project, an experimental project that aimed at using intermediaries between them and the civilization of the planet Earth. Human beings who would be instructed and trained to establish a method of approach between the two races. The group would be studied and used as a reference sample of terrestrial civilization. The work schedule would allow the extraterrestrials to learn in depth and accompany in detail the versatility of human behavior in different situations, and would offer the opportunity to find out what could be expected from man. According to the guides, they had already many times tried to approach people classified as intellectually able or professionally and hierarchically capable of establishing contact with extraterrestrials. However, these people were always linked to, tied to, or dependent on some ideological, political, or economic structure which cultivated the encounters in order to satisfy personal ambitions and desire for power, which is always behind these people's actions, consciously or subconsciously. In these cases, the contactees did not have enough freedom of movement to avoid colliding with the ambitions of their sponsors, for they would be watched constantly. The extraterrestrials themselves would be vulnerable to some undesirable interference, For example, if the encounter occurred in a country considered developed, the extraterrestrials would be indicating, according to some, a special preference for the chosen country that would automatically imply a preference for its political and social system. As for the orthodox researchers of extraterrestrial phenomenology, they would hardly submit to the discomfort of the encounters and would never even take the first steps for a mental contact. According to them, these kinds of phenomena are associated with mystics, wonder workers, and sorcerers, rather than with scientists. The guides are above all that. That is why they chose a small, underdeveloped country and a group of innocent kids like us that meant no harm and had no prejudices, were extremely curious and quite mad and adventurous, who had nothing to lose except to embark on the most fantastic adventure their imagination could ever have conceived. June was full of novelties. The outings to Chilka were always supported by the presence of flying objects that came and stood in the air above our group. But one day, the situation changed. As usual on weekends, our group, this time consisting of Sixto, Juan, Kugi, Alfredo, Juan Carlos, and I, went to Chilka, where we arrived earlier than usual at Juan's mother's house in the village of Papa Leon III. It was the ideal place for our preparation, for the village was only a few kilometers from mine, where we had our activities of self-control and experiments in general. There was always a delicious snack waiting for us prepared by Doña Maruja, Juan's mother, and also a refreshing, energizing dip in the swimming pool. Around 6 p.m., we started off for the usual place of work, mine. Along the way, we were singing and telling jokes, happy for another forthcoming encounter with the guides. We reached the mountains, and when it began to darken, we turned on our flashlights to light the way. Sixto and Kugi walked ahead at a short distance from the rest of the group. Something strange surprised us all. Suddenly, Sixto disappeared from beside Kugi, who called for him in all directions. On the other side, Sixto, alone and confused, appeared in the dunes a few meters from the mine. He couldn't understand what was going on and called anxiously for the others at the top of his lungs. Very upset, nevertheless, he tried to calm himself and stop to think. He should look for a hill to climb as a means of spotting the others. He walked on the sand with difficulty, and it took him some time to understand where he was. He wondered how he had gotten there so quickly and what had happened to the rest of the group. For the first time, he felt confused, frightened, abandoned, and lonely in the vastness of the desert. Slowly, a nasty fright took hold of his mind. Anyway, even if he had walked very fast, he would be able to see his friends' torches. But where were they? He decided to go back to the mine to look for the group. He knew the group would go there because there had been a communication for that night. Walking slowly on the uncomfortable sand, Sixto noticed a strange light between two hills. He thought it was the group and hurried towards it. As he got nearer, he could see that the light did not come from a focus, as there was no point of projection. It was like a fluorescent mist the shape of a half moon at about 10 meters in radius, and that stayed fixed and concentrated at the same place. The light did not expand or diffuse. At first, he thought it was a landed spaceship, but as he approached, he saw that the light was present in all the mist. It was a compact, bluish smoke and definitely did not belong to anything in this world. He wondered what it was. When he was about 7 or 8 meters from the light, he stopped. Quite worried and very curious, he watched the phenomenon carefully, trying to identify it. While he was watching, a humanoid figure came slowly out of the smoke with his right arm raised. Sixto was startled. In a panic, he wanted to run away, but his legs did not obey him. He had lost control of his body. He thought he would faint. He sweated and felt frozen to the ground. In that mental and emotional chaos, a thought took shape and a voice said, "Calm down. I won't do you any harm. My name is Oxalk. Do you remember me?" It was a tall man, almost 1.8 meters, blonde, thin, long hair combed to the back, and a high forehead. His face was very similar to a human's, and his eyes were oblong like a Mongol's. His body was perfectly proportioned, like an athlete's. He wore a white tunic down to the calves of his legs, very similar to the Roman toga and with golden trimming. The sleeves were loose, and he seemed to be wearing high leg boots that looked golden and metallic. At that moment, the rest of the group arrived. The luminosity had also attracted us to the place, for we thought my brother might be there. We were paralyzed by the scene. For the first time, we were face to face with one of the beings we had been contacting. We watched in total amazement. Sixto looked at the being as if in a trance. Very frightened and curious, I approached from the side, trying to see the being in the mist better from behind. My other companions stood as if hypnotized a few meters behind Sixto. When Oxalk finished, he turned and entered the light again as he had left it before. I stood transfixed, looking at the light from its side, and saw the guide enter a wall as thin as a blade without coming out on the other side. I fell to the ground on the sand. I could not believe what my eyes had just seen. It was too incredible. At that moment, the only thought that crossed my mind was, how shall I explain it to my father? After the encounter, we all came to as if emerging from a hypnotic trance and went straight to Sixto. Perturbed, we all asked him questions at the same time. Still shaking, Sixto told us about a new outing appointment to happen soon, for which we should all be better prepared. A new experiment would occur on the following weekend at the same place. He also explained that we had not seen a real figure. It was only the projection of the guide's image, a tridimensional holograph. Oxalk had informed Sixto that this door of light was called a Zendra, or interdimensional entrance. They used it not only for projections such as the one we had just seen, but chiefly as a means of transport which allowed their displacement from one place to another in only a few seconds. The spaceships also used this interesting device to jump great distances in space and avoid the inconvenience of the relative action of time during and at the end of their journey. According to the extraterrestrials, there are 4 types of gates, or Zendras. Number 4 is normally used for physical transport. The others are fields of energy, so they can be used for different purposes, including the holographic projection of images. After this exciting encounter with Oxalk and a Zendra, our small group returned to Lima. We were very impressed and moved by the event and related it to the other kids in our group. One more fascinating experience to be added to our pile of madness. But even if nobody believed us, we were all very happy because we knew that a new phase in the relationship with our guides was beginning. Long months, frequent trips to Chilca, and innumerable messages later, the extraterrestrials were making themselves visible at last. However, not everybody was happy. My father was very upset with all this. He did not understand the simplicity of the events. He suspected something. He knew that all this had a price and that we had been chosen for some very important reason. All through the week, there were a lot of conversations, communications, and speculation over what awaited us. And even if nothing occurred, the satisfaction of having seen them for the first time was worth all the work and effort. Saturday came. Sixto, Henrique, Juan, Mito, and I were called for the outing. Although they were anxious to accompany us, Kuki, Alfredo, and Juan Carlos could not come because of familial problems. Very early, the group left Lima for Papa Leon XIII, our headquarters for field operations at Donna Maruja's wonderful house. After the usual swimming pool dip and the unfailing hearty meal, we waited for the evening. Close to 6 p.m., we put our knapsacks on our shoulders and started off to mine. We walked in the darkness of the clear desert night. Everybody kept looking around, hoping to discover another Zendra. Anything could happen, and we were on the alert, but we reached our usual place without incident. There, we left our baggage, relaxed for a while, and waited. A few of us began the communication in order to receive further instructions, while the rest watched the sky. The answer came promptly, indicating only that we should continue to be on the alert. Calm and watchful as the guides had requested, we soon saw the movement of a spaceship at a great distance. A dot of yellowish-white light similar to the brightness of a planet on a starry night could be seen perfectly. The object maneuvered, turned, and began to approach. It was coming down fast. Our group watched, our hearts throbbing, while our feet took us backwards, step over step. Then, to everybody's surprise, the spaceship landed right before our amazed eyes. The spaceship was disc-shaped, similar to a huge lentil, about 25 to 30 meters in diameter. It did not seem to have any kind of feet or tripod to sustain it. The disc stood floating in the air about 2 meters off the ground. It did not have any external lights or brightness. One had the impression that the outside lighting had been turned off. The fuselage was smooth, opaque silver. There were no visible windows or hatches. A few seconds later, a hatch did open right in the center of the spaceship, and a kind of ramp or platform was lowered. It was the only part that touched the ground. Our group was about 100 meters from the landing site. We could hardly stand. Our hearts accelerated to 1,000 beats per minute, threatening to pop out of our mouths. Cold sweat ran down our bodies while 1,000 thoughts tumultuously raced through our frightened minds. We were literally scared stiff. A light coming from inside the spaceship tore the darkness of the night, lighting up the neighboring hills with a whitish brightness. Then a shadow stood out in silhouette against the light coming from the open hatch. It was a member of the crew. Emotion and fright blended in a disagreeable cocktail. A chilling sensation ran down our spines. As if activated by a spring, we all stepped backwards. All the preparation, all the previous tests, all the training were forgotten. An unbearable fright took hold of us, but we could not move. This was not a projection. They were there, flesh and blood, near us, and what was worse, waiting for us. At the top of the ramp, the figure that came out of the spaceship waved to us with his right hand. Simultaneously, we all received the same message that said, "Don't be afraid. We won't do you any harm. We are here for you." The light behind him, in contrast with the darkness of the night, prevented us from seeing his features in detail, although his silhouette reminded us vaguely of Oxalk's projection a few days before. Gradually, our pulse became normal. We calmed down and recovered, and were confident again. The extraterrestrial at the hatch still waved, summoning the group to come near. We mentally heard a voice that invited us to the spaceship. Quite frightened, I asked my friends what we should do. A worried Sixto warned us that if we did not make an immediate decision, they were likely to give up on us, and we might never have this opportunity again. Though still in doubt, I began to push the group towards the craft. Walking very slowly, both frightened and curious, we approached the ship. At each step, our eyes met for the approval of the next, and that way we succeeded in reaching the foot of the ramp. Never had a walk seemed to take so long. When we began to go up the first meters of the ramp, we observed that the being awaiting us was very similar to Oxalk. He was tall with thin, long hair, combed back, blonde like straw. But he was dressed differently to Oxalk. He wore long, yellow coveralls of a material that looked like metal. They were tight on the body with loose sleeves that ended in wide cuffs looking like leather. The collar was round with a kind of bib in the same material as the cuffs. He wore a wide belt and high-leg boots that also looked metallic. When we got near him, we stopped. We were nervous and frightened. The being left the door and waved us in after him. I could not believe what I saw. It was like a fantastic dream. To make sure it was not, I touched the fuselage several times. Our grader noticed and smiled, and when I saw that I was being watched, I felt rather awkward and embarrassed, but tried to disguise it. The sensation of being an inferior organism under observation made me feel abashed. I pushed the rest of the group in front of me into the spaceship. In a large, well-lit, circular room, 5 other beings awaited us. 2 of them were slender women of dazzling beauty. The 3 men had angelic faces and athletic bodies. They also watched us very curiously and attentively. Both women wore long coveralls quite similar to the men's, the only difference being a kind of hood that covered their heads similar to the ones worn by divers. The hood was a continuation of the clothes they were wearing, allowing only their faces to be seen. At the back, their lank, thin, long hair came out of a hole in the hood. Although the women were not close to us, we could see that they were not wearing any kind of makeup or paint. Their faces were clean, visually charming, and angelic. Only the men of the crew had their heads uncovered. The men's clothes, as well as the women's, were made of a synthetic material very similar to lycra, but with a peculiar metallic brightness. Each one wore a different color, and as we learned later, it indicated different functions. To complete what looked like work clothes or a kind of special uniform, men and women wore bronze-brown, high-leg boots with metallic golden details. They did not have any symbols or badges on their clothes, nor any other kind of personal identification. By what we could see, they all had the same origin, the planet Apu in the Alpha Centauri system. There were no physical differences between them, and their features were different from Oxalk's. They They were very tall, a little more than 2 meters, and the sexes were very well defined externally. Their hair was long, thin, and bright silvery white. The eyes were almond-shaped, slanted in relation to the nose. The separation between them was wider, and they were different shades of water green, pink, and blue. These colors and the white, very thin, almost non-existent eyelashes and eyebrows contrasted with the color of their light copper skin, making a strange, exotic combination. Their features were delicate, fine, and pleasing. The individual that had met us at the entrance identified himself as the commander of the spaceship fleet working in the solar system. His name is Jarn Shirat. This name is very similar to Ashtar Sharon, belonging to that contact in Venezuela, narrated by Dr. Yanez, who had identified himself as the commander of the spaceship fleet from Ganymede. As we were informed later, the syllables shish and ir in the surnames mean command and dignity, respectively. And as both have similar functions, the syllable shur is part of both names, indicating the function performed. The final syllables art and an show the jurisdiction and competence of the command. These two names in particular have caused much confusion because of their similarity. J.J. Benitez himself, when he published his book UFOs, SOS to Humanity, and other people who spoke or wrote about our experiences, also have made the same unfortunate mistake. Well, let's go on with our narrative. That name was not strange to us, for we had already received it at other times, but it is quite different to receive a telepathic message from a person with no face, as opposed to speaking to him face to face. It was shocking. When we heard the name, we felt deeply touched, especially Sixto and I, because our doubts and worries about the communication had finally come to an end. Antar waved us toward something similar to a TV set built into a panel on a wall of the room. The screen was rectangular, flat, and much bigger than any TV set that we had seen at that time. The place was fascinating. In what seemed to be the command room, there were 2 different levels. It was as if there were a kind of circular mezzanine behind the control room where we stood. The room was all carpeted with what seemed to be a synthetic padded material like our carpeting. The walls were metallic and smooth with indirect lighting that gave us the impression that the points of light came out of the walls themselves. There was no point that showed the presence of any bulb or focus of light. It was everywhere and did not disturb the eyes. In the center, there stood a cylinder a little more than 1.550 meters tall, with instrument panels on the sides, and was covered by a glass dome. Colored lights flickered on the small board around the cylinder. On the sides of the room, there were 2 huge 4-seater sofas, as well as a group of multicolored light panels built in seamlessly along the walls. The room was 5 to 6 meters high. In the center of the roof, there was a strange concave circular object. The members of the crew were, as it seemed, at their respective places of work. The 2 women watched us from a kind of elevated balcony. It looked like the resting area of a gallery at the higher level that ran behind the control room. From the place where we stood, part of that passage could be seen. One of the males of the crew was sitting in an armchair that looked extremely comfortable. It was a revolving, reclining, anatomical chair fixed to the floor that could slide backwards and forwards. That astronaut was in front of the panel that controlled the screen, similar to a TV, which was obviously some kind of monitor. The other 2 stood together in front of a set of command controls. We noticed that there were no edges or corners anywhere in the room. Everything was curved, visually harmonious, and different. I took advantage of the situation to satisfy my curiosity and asked what that huge cylinder in the center of the room was. Antar answered that it was an observation screen on which you could see the area over which you were flying in holographic form, allowing you to observe the disposition of the local geography and to identify the edges and characteristics in relief of the terrain. We all could hear the answers simultaneously, although our hosts did not utter a sound. The words reached our minds so powerfully that they seemed to have been verbalized. Antar approached the monitor and pointed at the screen. At that moment, the member of the crew who was sitting slid his hand over some small half-spheres with smaller spheres of different colors built in. The colors changed. The screen was turned on and an image was shown. It showed Lima in color from above, a great novelty to all of us. For before 1976, not all TV channels in Peru had the equipment for color transmission. The images showed sequences of the town during the day, and we concluded it was most probably a film, some kind of a recording. Suddenly, it focused on the interior of a residence. That change of scene from the exterior to the interior was funny. You had the impression that a camera was filming it. We had the biggest surprise when we saw that the house we were looking at on the screen was mine. The scenes showed our first meeting to try the contact on January 22nd. We were now at the end of June. All the steps we had taken to establish the contact had been recorded. I wondered how they could have recorded the interior of a house, my house. We had not noticed the presence of any camera. How could they know about us when we were just attempting to get in touch with them for the first time? Then I remembered that during the year 1966, several objects had been seen flying over Lima during the night, and in particular, 2 disc-shaped objects with a yellowish light had flown over my house one of those nights. Everybody, including my parents and some friends, could clearly see their flight at low altitude, and I remembered having tried to talk with the crew mentally, asking them to give me a sign to confirm it. Wondered if subsequent events were the confirmation I was waiting for. Lost in thought and memories, I looked at Antar, who smiled at me. I thought that was my answer. The images went on, scenes from daily routines, one of the streets, at school, details that evidenced a thorough supervision. How could they have foreseen that we would try to contact them? I still thought. It seemed that somehow they knew what was going to happen. We had the vivid impression that they had been watching us for some time. But since when? All of a sudden, the view changed. The screen did not show the city of Lima anymore. It showed an arid, barren desert, ruins of buildings, a yellow sky full of gray clouds, strong winds that blew up dust, and a complete absence of life. Juan asked Antar what region of the planet that was, or if the images referred to another world. Antar answered promptly, "This is the probable end of your world. Total pitiless destruction is being engendered in man's heart. Man himself will be responsible for the extinction of his race and his world. Shortly, if you don't reorient your course of development to more mindful lines, and if you don't allow all benefits to be extended to all human communities, everything will come to an end. In the future, walking on the earth will be like walking in a desert. There will be no towns or fields, for everything will have been devastated by human irresponsibility and egotism." The images that were shown in the space-time monitor, as the extraterrestrials called the machine, touched us deeply. Visibly disturbed, Mito asked the guide, "I can't see any kind of life. Where is it?" Antar replied, "Has man worried at least about his own life?" Antar explained that intelligent creatures on the planet Earth had been evolving in the wrong way. Their civilization, their culture, their values had gone in a direction totally opposite to the one of universal laws. The result was a devastating process of rather dangerous proportions, endangering not only the continuity of life on the planet, but also menacing and worrying other civilizations. That was one of the reasons why they had been forced to intervene. According to the guides, from the moment you invade and attack the rights of others, you are automatically giving them the freedom to defend themselves and act. Besides that, there were also theoretical advances in the field of physics relating to time travel, quantum physics, mathematics, and interdimensionality. In fact, a fast-developing science that could endanger the stability of thousands of civilizations that share our universe, once used by a society that has not yet succeeded in solving even their basic problems such as hunger and violence. There is also the paramount potentiality of the human being. These psychic faculties in the hands of naughty, egotistical children, like the inhabitants of the earth, would represent total chaos. Very much interested in the development of the human being that somehow reminded them of their own past history, the extraterrestrial said that men had created their own history, independent of the real one that rules the universe. He explained that men had created gods and demigods to make it easier to justify their sufferings, and that although religion was a natural condition of their process of evolution, it had become a trap. The values that guide our life should be based on cosmic natural laws, as followed by simple creatures like animals that live and develop harmoniously as a response to a superior law, their instinct. On the contrary, men follow values that have a regional or cultural character, created and adapted to satisfy relative necessities, having great ambiguity and disrespecting their own instinct cruelly and egotistically. The number of interpretations of the basic values is so great that every land and every human or animal life is governed in a totally different way. Their moral values are as relative as the place where they live or the clothes they wear. Their notions about the right to live or die and their concepts of good and evil are contradictory and confused. While eating a fellow man is normal in certain places, in others it is abhorrent. Killing in town is a crime, but in war it is an act of heroism. Being faithful to principles is an attitude of weakness and stagnancy, but being corrupt and disloyal towards established laws are compulsory conditions to being successful. In short, on his road to evolution, man has found a sidetrack that led him astray from constructive and coherent development. The guides showed us clearly that the world where we live is on the edge of a precipice of unknown depth. For the time being, the moment of the fall is still unknown. Antar continued, saying that humanity lives in a world structured on a fragile basis that was created by authoritarian, repressive conquests, imposing their sovereignty by force throughout history, and not through a systematic process of progressively substituting better conditions for all. The process of socialization that built our civilization and created our institutions came from the cultural recombinations rendered by constant wars, revolutions, and commercial exchanges. The civilization model of this humanity is a miscegenation of pseudo-models that ended up in generating a hybrid. As a result, we have a man submitted to an exhaustive condition of permanent probation. He is tested, demanded of, questioned, repressed, humiliated, and put on sale in a market of opportunities. He is part of an infrastructure in which he tries desperately to survive, but which apparently seems to feed and breed on him. The institutional system as a whole has embodied man as a servant that feeds it, making him responsible for its continuation and perpetuation. In this context, the utilization of the human being is that of a slave that supplies the feedback in the process of struggle and competition of the system. He only exists to perpetuate the competition and make it more and more difficult every day. The greater our number, the more strenuous the fight will acquire some space, an opportunity for success or decent living conditions. The system does not worry about the circumstances and means offered to survive. The need to survive and the ideal models of success continually in evidence are the motivators that push man into action. The means of mass communication, family, school, and work are also contaminated and conditioned by the values serving the interests of the system, and they help to reinforce the rules of the game in everybody's mind. The tension is reaching its limit. In early childhood, the human being already learns to compete as an ancient gladiator, using every means to win, such as violence, astuteness, and disloyalty. The most astute will be the joy of his parents. He is outstanding in his group, for he quickly followed the wise examples of the adults. He will be rewarded for his conquests, and he will learn that the more enemies he conquers and the more victories he wins, the more admiration, approval, and benefits he will receive from the world. As a result of this daily battle for victory, today he is a man tired of the exhausting confrontation. A young man turned into himself because he does not trust anybody. He was trained to consider the world as a pitiless opponent and every person as his executioner. He is always on guard, but looks for a moment of peace and pleasure, only a second to forget the madness of being a warrior and to be just an ordinary person, remembering that deep in his heart there are feelings and desires that unfortunately will never come true in this world of contradictions, mistrust, and competition. In many cases, alienation is the only way out in order to become conscious somehow that we are something a little more complex than an animal. The human being of today is sad and disillusioned. Living in a world of competitors, he does not believe in freedom, nor is he certain that someday everything can change. He does not have faith in himself, and he doubts if he is able to cope with the daily battle where he can be destroyed or put aside and forgotten. Life has become an obscure concept, a distant, puzzling word with unknown contents. Man does not live, he hardly survives. Unconsciously, nobody wants to continue in this kind of senseless existence, nor does anyone want to take part in this scenario any longer, because deep inside man does not want to suffer. The contradiction of living in a hostile world makes us give up finding any explanation. There is no logic in an anti-life. You cannot respect someone who shares the complicity of keeping the soul-devouring monster active. That is why man struggles against a feeling of guilt for this connivance with the reality that he would like to destroy. So, because he cannot exterminate the beast that torments him, he prefers to strike a mortal blow towards himself in a suicidal process. He ignores or disregards the dangers around him, runs unnecessary risks, puts his health in jeopardy. He tries to take advantage of every moment with great intensity, for at any time everything may end. He thinks that peace will only be attained when he is able to escape his fears, the fears caused by the system. The long hours that are still left are a torment without much meaning, for the only winner in this silly, fruitless war will always be the system itself. The only way out is to change everything. Living has become a painful agony, a daily routine where the world is an arena with no limits or rules of any kind, and where man is the gladiator that faces his fellow man in the hypothetical conquest of a fictitious better condition of life, and where the only silent, satisfied observer is the system itself. As in ancient Rome, death meant freedom. In case of survival, the captive would always return to the arena. Even so, why does the need for survival remain? Because under all circumstances, there is still the flame of life, hope. So, failing to understand the true meaning of life, man chooses to abandon it and live the present moment in search of a slow death, a fictitious, worthless present where he will try to fill every vacant moment with excuses in the endless depressing hours, minutes, and seconds of a life. Thus, he will not have time to worry about tomorrow, about whether there will be another day, or whether it will be worse than today. Unfortunately, this slow, gradual suicide occurs with the approval of his conscience, fully disguising and postponing the final result. It is sad to think that the only energy that motivates him to go on living and delaying death is the faint hope that someday, perhaps tomorrow, magically everything will be different. According to the guides, man is not an evil creature. He is simply ignorant and an arrogant subject. Afraid to face his cultural failure and to admit his error in the construction of an incorrect lifestyle, feeling unable to begin again, he became anthropocentric and thus more easily found reasons to justify his errors. This situation limits him and takes him farther from the right track. Pretentiously, he believes that he is the center of the universe, that he knows all secrets and is able to unravel all of them. In this way, he makes his journey more difficult because if everybody thinks as egotistically as he, nobody will listen to anybody. Each person will be alone, translating the enigmas of the world and trying to find his own meaning for life. There is only one way to rescue man from this sidetrack, and that is to reform and begin everything again. Antar looked fixedly at each one of us and said, "Now you know what the future of your world may be like. There are no fixed dates for it. It may occur in 10 or 30 years, but sooner or later this future will come to be. You may be ready or not, but you can change it. It is up to you to think and decide if you want to take part in a task that can procure a better life for humanity. We are here to help you achieve that. If man evolves, he will be able to take the experience of a life full of realizations to other worlds. But if he continues killing, spoiling his own home, the only thing he can offer is the irresponsibility of endangering other worlds and the menace of chaos and degradation because of his egotism. Any information that we could offer man now would only serve his purpose of exploiting his fellow man and repressing the weak, or the ones who would block his way towards the expansion of his privilege. So we have come to offer you the opportunity to join us in this task. Preservation of universal order will be your objective. If you accept, we will provide the necessary training. If not, if you think it will be too much responsibility, we will leave you and will not come back. We will look for other human beings who will be willing to help us. Think it over. You must give us an answer in a week." After some time, Antar said, Soon, with all the new technology, man will reach distant worlds. He will soon be landing on the other planets of his solar system and will obviously find us. We are not interested in promoting any nation or benefiting any great power. At present, the only thing the human being can bring to our civilization is egotism, ambition, chaos, and a bereft spirit. Man is not ready to face civilizations like ours. The amount of knowledge that we have can be fatal to your world. So it is important to us to start your preparation. If that confrontation must happen before your destruction, it is fundamental that the confrontation should benefit both sides. If you accept our proposal, you will help it come true. You will be one more link between our worlds. After that, Antar accompanied us to the entrance hatch and we left the spaceship. I must confess we were overwhelmed and puzzled. The extraterrestrials' words echoed in our minds endlessly, rolling and rumbling like thunder. We saw the spaceship take off quickly and silently, speed towards the stars. In a few seconds, it became a small dot of light lost in the vastness of the cosmic ocean. The silence of the desert added to our bewilderment. We kept gazing at the stars. A light breeze blew on our faces, and the chill of night brought us back to the world. During the car trip to Lima, we could hardly utter a word. We could not get the encounter, the information, and mainly the proposal out of our minds. The following week was a difficult one. We felt that we had reached a turning point. We could not lose the opportunity of giving such important meaning to our lives as the one shown us by the guides. Our group would have the incredible chance to receive an orientation from a civilization at least a few thousand years ahead of ours, and to revise together the process of formation that has led humanity to where it is now. We would learn and understand in detail the mysteries of our origin and what happened on the path of our evolution. With no religious, esoteric, mystical, political, or cultural ties to interfere, and no ideological compromise to limit us, our minds would be free to learn and understand everything that they would be willing to give. However, in order to achieve it, we would need to acquire at least the basic, important philosophical and social knowledge of our present world in order to compare it with the extraterrestrials' world. Only in this way could we identify and recognize where and when man took the wrong track and learn which was the right way back. We had to make a quick decision. The lives of millions of people in the whole world might change because of it. The guides had made it clear that all this work was part of an experimental project, a project that aimed at giving man new hope to re-encounter and restart on the path of coherent evolution. The way that would allow man to find the lost, true pleasure of life. A new, productive, constructive, healthy, authentic life would be discovered again. That June became a month full of adventures in the history of our lives. July promised a lot of experience, achievement, and probably a never-ending headache.